This is a difficult book. Lots of you may have heard the stories of the book of Judges, like Samson and Deborah and Gideon. Those, and we kind of, especially if you know the children's version of those, they're like heroes of the Bible, right? But when you know the details of these stories, this is an R-rated book. This book in the details is rated R for violence, and probably sexuality. It's not, it's funny because Martin Luther, during the Protestant Reformation, wanted to drop the book of James from the Bible because he thought there was a contradiction between the grace message and the works message in James. I don't think there's a problem with that at all. But if I had to erase one book from the Bible, it'd probably be Judges. Now, I would never do that because all words is God's word. But the book of Judges is an interesting book. So we're going to go through it. Much like in all the other books, the first 5 books of the Bible, remember we looked at the Hebrew name, and the Hebrew name was the first important word in the book. Once in last week with Yeshua or Joshua, that's not true, right? It had the same name. Yeshua was the Hebrew name for Jesus and Joshua, and it stayed, and the Hebrew name for that was Yeshua as well. And Judges is the same way. The book of Judges is Judges in Hebrew, and that's Shoftim. So it's just a Hebrew name for Judges. So we've got the same name, just a Hebrew version of it. When you think of Judges, though, our American or Western mind, or maybe even the world, goes right to a man in black robes sitting on, the judgment seat and making a gavel. That's not these at all. The book of Judges has 12 judges, and they're more like warrior chieftains. And God calls up these warrior chieftains in a regional area to free or give victory over the enemy that God allowed to overcome Israel because of their sin. And we'll look at all that. So don't think of a judge. Think of a warrior chieftain is a better explanation of who they are. Of course, we don't know who the author of Judges was because it doesn't tell us. The Bible doesn't tell us. I refer to the Talmud a lot, which is the Hebrew commentary of the Old Testament that the Jewish nation uses, the nation of Israel uses. They have Samuel as the author. Samuel's probably picked as the author because the next book we're going to do is the book of Ruth. And in Ruth, it starts out, Ruth was done in the time of the Judges. So Ruth, a lot of people teach them together because Ruth and Judges overlap. And Samuel wrote Ruth, and then the next 2 books are 1st and 2nd Samuel. So because Samuel wrote Ruth, which is the same time period, and the next 2 books, 1st and 2nd Samuel, they put him as the highly likely author of Judges. The major theme throughout the whole book of Judges is every man did what was right in his own eyes. The theme is that because 4 different places in the beginning, in the middle twice, and then at the end, it says, for there was no king in the nation of Israel, and each man did what was right in his own eyes. That statement is made 4 times in the book. And we're going to see why. So high level book of Judges here. Those are a picture I found of the 12 judges. Anyway, you can put it up into 3 different buckets. I like buckets. I like things to be compartmentalized for me. And the first 2 chapters is like an introduction, but the problem with it is there's stories. So like in chapter 1 and 2, it's like the introduction of where they came from, where they are, before we get into the 12 judges. And then the next bucket I put is chapters 3 through 16. That's actually going through each of the 12 judges. And then the last chapters, 17 through 21, are some other stories as well. So we've got stories in the beginning with a introduction. We got 12 judges, which is the main theme of the book. And then at the end of it, we also have some stories as well as some reflection on the whole book. So that's how it's broken up. I write this because of my introduction about, Judges is an R-rated book. And you have to dig for good stuff. The people are bad. Not all the judges are good. There's some good judges, but not all the judges are good. You know, it's who's worse, you know, sometimes the judges or the enemy that they're defeating. And we'll take this. But all scripture in the Bible, all scripture is God breathed and useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, training in righteousness. And that's what we're going to look at the book of Judges. We're going to see that all scripture is good. So we're going to find the good in this scripture. Okay. This picture, this tells us a couple things here. So this is to catch us from where we were last week, right? Last week we did Joshua, and it was an uplifting book, but it ends, of course, with Joshua telling the people, you know, remember they were on the east side of the Jordan with Moses, and they had some skirmishes and battles, but then they went across the Jordan with Joshua. They defeated Jericho very, very easy, right? And then they had a little difficulty with Ai because they didn't go to the Lord, but then they had victory over Ai. And Joshua led them for 25 years, okay? So up until now, we have Moses who led them for 40 years, Joshua who led them for 25 years. So they had a centralized leadership and two strong God-led leaders of Moses and Joshua. All of a sudden now they're on the east side, and if you remember last week when we talked about it, we had Jericho, we had Ai, we had a southern campaign, we had a northern campaign. They were victorious because they looked to God for those victories, and God gave them the victories. The whole land of Canaan, the promised land, was conquered. It was conquered in effect that they conquered all the kings, but now what you have is a bunch of people groups that have not been cleaned up yet. They have not got rid of them. So Joshua dies, and they'd finished all their battles with kingdoms, but they didn't clean out the people yet. So this is what they're tasked to do now, right? And God's going to send them over into their territory that Joshua gave them and Moses gave them, because the borders, remember we went through all the borders which each family, each tribe was allotted. And it starts out pretty good. Like in Judges chapter 1, verse 1 starts out pretty good, right? After the death of Joshua, the Israelites asked the Lord. That's a great way to start. They asked the Lord. That's about the last time they do it. Who of us will go up and fight against the Canaanites? And God answers that. So these are all the different people groups. And remember, up till now, a lot of the people groups that we found have been descendants and or relatives of Abraham, right? Whether they, were Lot's relatives or Esau. They were all these people groups that we see, the Hittites, the Jebusites, all of these people groups are not even from Shem. Remember, Abraham comes from Shem, from Noah had 3 sons. All of these come from Ham. And these are generically all called the Canaanites. So this whole area, the land of Canaan, right? But there are different people groups in there. So we're going to see judges come up from different families, Israelite tribes, fighting these people groups that are in there.
Ham and the two sons, Ham and...
You have Ham, Japheth, and Shem. And Shem is the messianic one. The Israel and Abraham comes from the family of Shem.
Yeah.
And Ham went south and conquered the South Middle East, Mesopotamia, all the way into the continent of Africa and stuff. So he populated all that. Japheth went north and west and did all of Europe. So you get the 3 sons, that's their descendants split out kind of like that.
And one of them went down like the Arab Muslim side. Which one was that?
Shem.
Shem.
That would be the same place that Abraham came from. The Muslims and all them. In fact, most of them are, Ishmael and Lot's and all of the Muslim, the religion didn't come till much later, right?
Later.
Since 17th century.
Okay.
But the people groups did, That's good. And so this, like I said, this is the Ham. These came from the Noah's son Ham. And remember in Genesis back, God said to Abraham, he had given this land, the land of Canaan, to them. But remember, well, we'll get to that. He told them that they were the sins of the Amorites had not reached its full potential or its fullness yet. So he was not going to judge them yet. And then that's the stories we went through with the other ones. And now we're where they got to the point where their evil has risen to a point where God says, I'm going to judge them now. So these people, they're not innocent people. They're sacrificing children. They're having prostitutional rituals. So I wanted to kind of get the area here. The one word for this book, remember I tried to find out a theme, or not a theme, but a one word name for this book is apostasy, because we're going to see it happens 8 times, and it's just a cycle that they can't get out of. I'm going to give you a high level, some maps here to kind of drill us down to where we are, but you've seen this map, so it shouldn't surprise you. From the fall or creation to Abraham is 2,000 years. From Abraham to the cross was 2,000 years. From the cross to 2033, if Christ died in 33 AD, is another 2,000 years. So that's the 6,000 years of man. Inside this 6,000 year period, we got Abraham to Joseph was 350 years. These numbers I'm going to give you are kind of rounded up, because from Joseph to Moses, or the book of Judges, is another 350 years. And then the book of Judges, we will be in when we're talking today, we'll cover a 350 year period. So kind of look at it as 2000, 2000, 2000, 350, 350, 350. Does that kind of make sense? So in this 2000 period from Abraham to the cross, you have 2,000 years. We're going to eat up 350 years from Abraham to Joseph. We'll eat up another 350 from Joseph to the Judges. So that's Joshua, Moses and Joshua. And then the Judges will eat up another 350. That gives us 1,050, right? So we have 950 left for the kings. And then the 400 years of silence before John the Baptist comes onto the scene. That takes up these 2,000 years. I'm trying to kind of give you guys these buckets to fall into. Okay, so when we take this big picture, we drill down just a tad more. Very busy chart. Don't really want to dive into this, but we have the pre-flood, we have the patriarchs, then we have the Exodus, the slavery, the conquering of Canaan, which Moses and Joseph did, and then boom, it puts us in the period of the Judges. All day today we'll be in this little blue spot right here. So this little blue thing. And then, like I said, then you go to the kings, the divided kingdom, and then the captivities, and then eventually into the 40 years of silence. We're going to take this little blue thing here that we're looking at. We're going to drill a little deeper into it. This gets us to the Judges. Now notice this thing says 336 years. I said 350. I said 350 for simplicity. 350, 350, 350. Some people think it was 360. Some people say it's 350. It's 360. You kind of get this chart counting up the life's engagement with the Judges comes up with 336. So, but in your mind, it's these buckets, big buckets think, right? When you get in the details, I want to say that to say, oh, but Scott said it was 350. Well, I can find other places it'll take 400. So not everybody agrees. Remember when we were looking at through the wandering in the wilderness, people had different routes. People also have different ages, but they're big bucket wise. They all agree. They all agree on that. So anyway, we're going to see from the very first Othniel judge all the way to Samson, the end one. This is kind of a big picture of you. Notice there's overlap in some of these that we're going to see, some of the judges, because they're territorial chieftains, right? They're not speaking for the whole nation anymore. They're called to free the particular tribe that got themselves into trouble because of what they did. So anyway, so that's kind of a big picture of what we're going to be going over today. I like pictures. I think pictures, words are necessary, but I like pictures. So what this does is it breaks up all the different tribes, and notice that these are the 12 tribes and where they're located, and then these are the 12 judges that come out of the 12 tribes. There's a lot of 12s in the Bible, right? You get the 12 tribes, you get the 12 judges, you get the 12 minor prophets, you get the 12 disciples. God uses 12 a lot, and that goes back to numerology and what it means. But anyway, so we've got the 12 tribes landmass, where they are, and then the different tribes. Not every tribe has a judge that comes out of it. Some tribes have multiple judges that come out of it. So we're going to step through all of these judges. And over here, I broke it up into the first thing is the major and minor, much like we have major prophets and minor prophets. And in major prophets and minor prophets, it's not because of their importance. It's because of their size. How much attention or scripture was applied to them makes them a major or minor. Same thing with these judges. How many verses in the book of Judges or chapters went against this particular judge? I put verses up here. Notice up here that I've got the major judges and then the minor. In the minor slot, Shamgar, one verse. All we know about Shamgar is what one verse tells us. And on all the minors, Tola 2, J.R. 3. So we don't have a lot of verses, so we'll probably go through them pretty quick because there's only those verses. The major judges are the more popular judges that you've probably heard stories about, like Deborah and Gideon and Samson. They've got a lot. I mean, Samson with 96, Gideon with 100. That's why Bible studies, the kids know about Gideon and they know about Samson because there's so many verses applied to them where you kind of got to dig for the other ones because there's not very many verses. You got to study a little harder. And then I gave them down here in order. This is the order at which they appear in the book. So you got how many verses applied to them and then how many and in order. And now when we go through these, what I've done for you is I put some of this information as we get to the first one, ethanol. I'll tell you what tribe he's from, how many verses as we're going through them. Anyway, so that gets us, that's a long introduction to get us to chapter 1.
That took a lot of time, by the way. You did those little squares and all that?
Yeah.
It
was So, Judges, it's like I said, Judges chapter 1 and 2 kind of introduces the book before we get to the actual 12 judges. And but it starts as what we read. It says, after the death of Joshua, the Israelites asked the Lord, who of us was going to go first and fight against the Canaanites? And God answers them. The Lord says, Judah shall go up. I have given him the land into his hands. This is important. So God just said, Judah, you go first and clear out your land of the people groups that are in there, the Canaanites, the Amorites. Judah does, by faith, go in there, but he kind of has a little lack of faith because he goes to his brother Simeon's group. So Simeon, they're all dead, right? But he goes to the family of Simeon and he goes, I tell you, I'll make a deal with you. If you come and fight with me, I'll go and fight against your people as well, which on the face of it seems okay. I mean, there's nothing wrong with partnering with your brothers and stuff like that. But it shows a little lack of faith because God already said, I gave you this land. So, but he makes this deal and they did it. And they go up there and they start dealing with this. It's an interesting thing here. What was I going to point out here? Sure, the defeats. Okay, yeah. It's so we have this starting of Judah going into battle. Remember Caleb? He was one of the 12 spies, and he was also probably one of the 2 that Joshua sent in there too. So he's a Jew. He's from the tribe of Judah. So he's going in with the tribe where God said to go first. And Caleb actually makes an offer. He says, to whoever will go in, they're fighting the kings and because now there's little chieftains. I said the kingdoms have fallen, but they're still little, I don't know what to call them other than family chieftains, because that's what they are now, pockets of large family groups. They're cleaning these out and they come and they stall with this particular king. And Caleb says, I will give my daughter in marriage to anybody who can take this king and to take this town. Well, our very first judge, who is the son of Judah's, he ended up being the nephew of Caleb. Anyway, so he takes his sword out, he wins this battle, and so Caleb gives him his daughter in marriage. And our very first judge we're going to look at when we get to him, Ophlin marries Caleb's daughter. And then the chapter 1 talks about her going to him now and saying to her father and saying, Caleb, you gave us this land because whoever won the victory, you got the land as well. You get my daughter and the land that you took. She goes, can you give us the spring above it and the springs below it? And it's his daughter asking, so he says, sure. So he gives it. So Ophlin, being the first judge, has this whole city that they conquered, as well as the territory south and north of this land. So these are details that are in the chapter. The main theme of it is pushing the tribes to go in there and clear their land out. But there's other little stories like that in there. Unfortunately, when they get to fighting the battle of the people groups in the plains, they bog down and they can't defeat them because the people in the plains have chariots, and Israel doesn't have that technology. So when they came up against these chariots, that's like tanks of their day, right? They were defeated. They didn't go to God. They were defeated and they got pushed back. So now we're going to go to the chapter 2, but we have Judah who went up there with Simeon and they didn't do the job. They did a lot of it, but they didn't clear it. There's still people groups, which is going to cause them problems in the future, right? Chapter 2, we get the angel of the Lord. This kind of sets the tone for where we're going to go for the rest of the book, too. The angel of the Lord went up to Gilgal to Bochim and said, I brought you out of remember, the angel of the Lord is a Christendom, right? It's Christ, a Christophany. It's where Christ is appearing to them. And we know this because any time in the Bible that we see an angel come down to talk to anybody, when they try to bow down and worship them, there's a no, don't worship me. I'm a servant just like you. And they make him get up. That's true in Genesis all the way to Revelation when John tries to do it. Any angel corrects them and says, I'm a servant, do not worship me. When it's a Christophany, the angel of the Lord.
The angel, yeah.
Jesus does not say, don't worship me. He says, in fact, he's going to say, remove your sandals. You're in a holy place. He accepts the worship. You know it's a Christophany, which is a pre-incarnated appearance of Christ before the cross, and he becomes his man. It becomes humanity. Anyway, so I brought you up out of Egypt and led you into the land I swore to your ancestors. I said, I will never break my covenant with you, and you shall not make a covenant with the people of this land, which they already broke once already with the Gibeonites. But you shall break down their altars. Remember, it reached that level when now they're having altars, the sacrifices. Yet you have disobeyed me. You have done this. And I have also said, I will not drive them out before you. They will become traps for you, and their gods will become snares for you. So remember, the commandment is high level. You go drive these people out. I promised you this land. I promised your ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, this land. I'll never break that promise. Deuteronomy, he said, you can stay in this land as long as you obey the law. That's the blood covenant you made with me up on Mount Sinai. You made a covenant that you'll follow my laws and you can possess this land as long as you do that. They're in the land because of Moses and Joshua, but now they start taking on Canaanite, Amorite wives, and their men start worshiping other gods. So basically God says, I'm good because you didn't go in and do what I told you and get rid of them all. I'm going to leave them there for you. I'm not going to destroy them. I'm going to leave them there, and they're going to be a snare to you. And they end up being a snare their whole life, right? And then 4 says, when the angel of the Lord had spoken these things to all the Israelites, the people wept aloud, and they called the place Bochim. There they offered sacrifice to the Lord. So we know that also confirms that this was a Christophany.
Didn't he make them eventually make them slaves, though?
They did. That's a good point.
They had to accept them, but because they didn't kill them all, and they ended up bringing water and.
So the Gibeonites, that's what they did with the Gibeonites. When they made on the east side, they made that treaty when the Gibeonites baked them, put the ruse, and they put old clothing and when they made an oath not to hurt them. What they made them was servants of the Levites to gather their wood and their water. That's right. But you're also true when they go into this land with all these people groups that I've said, and they don't clear them out like they were supposed to, they end up making them servants. Okay. But those servants end up having daughters and all that, and then they intermix. Yeah. And that's their real problem, right? Well, actually, not only, they were not told to make them servants. They were supposed to kill them all. I mean,
Right.
which is the viciousness of this story, right? They were supposed to wipe them out. And like I said, if you're going to teach us in detail, it's when you go through them being ordered to kill all these people, with the men, the women, the children, everybody, it's a tough message. It's a tough message to deliver, right? But if you think about it, God back in Genesis 15 or 18 said, they have not reached the level yet to be judged. And now they have. It's like, and I think I said this one of the weeks, if you have cancer and my arm has cancer or whatever has cancer is killing me, and the doctors remove all of that cancer to save the body, that's not bad. That's good. And that's what God's told them to do here. They were supposed to remove the Amorites, the Canaanites, and all those people groups because they were a cancer. And God knew that it would spread and could practically ruin the nation of Israel. In fact, it almost wipes out the Benjamite.
That's a good explanation when people, skeptics, say, well, how come God tells them to kill people?
Yeah.
It's the bigger picture. It's
the bigger picture is he's removing cancer from the body. Okay, so this cycle, we're going to start this cycle. There's going to be 8 cycles like this of apostasy, and then God sending a savior, and then revival. And so this is the pattern of the meat of the book of Judges. Is this cycle? Here's a better picture that kind of shows this cycle. Obviously, like I said, this is going to happen 8 times. The people are going to fall into sin, and we know why, because they didn't clear out the land of all the people groups, so they're intermarrying and stuff like that. And then they start sinning and committing idolatry. So God gets angry, and when God gets angry, he lifts his hand of protection off of them, allowing the people group to come up and overtake them. Okay, so we've seen God deal with the nation of Israel a lot of different ways through the wilderness, right? To an earthquake that he opens up, to a plague after the quail, to a fire he starts that burned. God has judged to the snakes that were killing them, unless they looked at the bronze snake. God has done it in a lot of different ways, but through the book of Judges, all 8 cycles of apostasy, he uses those people that they did not clean out to judge them. So they sin, God gets angry, God sends their enemy to oppress them, then they're oppressed, and then they cry out, God hears their cry, so he sends a judge. And that's these 12 judges that we're going to see. There's 12 judges against the 8 falls, or the 8 apostasies. The judge goes in there, God gives them strength, they're victorious against the enemy, they drive out the enemy, Israel becomes peaceful again, in prosperity. What happens? The judge dies, they forget about it, and the next group of people start sinning again. And 8 times. It's relentless, right? Reading this, really, guys, again and again and again. So, to some degree, if we were going to stay here and just do one judge a week or something, we would talk about these cycles and how they apply to our life today. Because we're not all that different. Well, we can look back, big picture, and say, come on, Israel, how did you do that? If you looked at this in our own lives, you could say, I've done that. I've not got sin completely out of my life. Yes, I put it aside, but I didn't completely deal with it. It's come up and bit me, or I let the world come too close to me. I'm too familiar with the world. The world doesn't realize that I'm a child of God. And, so these types of things apply to all of us, but they're more prominent when we see them here in the book, against the judges. But that's where this book, even though as dark as it might become in some of the judges, it's got good applications for a believer, so that we don't fall into the same pitfalls and make the same mistakes the nation of Israel falls into. So we get to our first judge, Othniel. The Othniel is the first. So the first apostasy starts, and we get our first judge. He's a major judge, obviously. Why? He's got 5 verses. Remember when I showed you that? The minor judges had 1, 2, 3. He barely makes it in. And the only reason he makes it in with the major with 5 is because it's an easy split, 6 and 6, right? There's 12 of them. He almost could go either way, like minor, major, because 5 verses is not a lot of verses. But we do learn some stuff about that. Now, once again, we have 5 verses, but the important thing to tell you how important that judge was to the nation is how long they lived in peace. He ruled over them for 40 years. So 40 years is a long time. When we get to some of the judges with 1 or 2 verses, if they rule for 20 years or 40 years or what, that speaks a mouthful, even though the 1 verse that we're going to tell about it might not. They obviously did a good job to rule over them for 40 years and only be mentioned for 1 verse. Anyway, so that I say that to say, just because they only have 1 verse, just because they're a minor judge versus a major, does not mean they weren't important at the time when they were doing it. So like I said, he is from the tribe of Judah. Remember, he's the one that made the deal, or Caleb said, whoever takes this land will get my daughter. He got his daughter. The Mesopotamians were actually, they were oppressing them for 8 years before this cycle that we were looking at in the last screen. They were doing it for 8 years. They were in 8 years of oppression, of being oppressed, and then they cried out, and God sends Othniel to them. One of the gory stories about this judge is he went in and defeated the kings, and there were kings that were on the enemy, and he cuts off their big toes and their thumbs. And it's kind of gross in describing he cuts off. But the king that he overthrew was known for, he had overcome 70 kings and cut all their toes, big toes and thumbs off. So that's kind of gross, right? The king that he overthrows did it and made all the kings that he overthrew eat scraps at his table with no thumbs and no toes. It's kind of gross, yeah. So this is where it kind of gets R-rated or just a little gross, right?
They had to atone for their sins.
They had to. Nice. Judges 3:7 says, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. We're going to see that judge after judge after judge. There's a lot of verses. Obviously, there's 5 verses, but this one here, it starts out the Israelites did what was evil in the eyes of the Lord. They forgot the Lord their God and served I say Baal, but it's Bala and the Ashtaras. So Ashtra and Bala, is it Bala?
Balls.
So,
That's what it's.
I'm sure if I remember how Bala. Anyway, Ashtra was supposedly the queen. It's Canaanite god, and she was the queen of fertility. And supposedly, there's the theory is she had Baal. He was an offspring of hers, and then they end up having sex. It just gets, like I said, this is where it gets R. And they believed when the 2 of these gods and goddess had sex in heaven, that it produced fertility, crops, offspring of themselves. So what they did is they mimicked what they thought was going on in heaven, and they built temples, and they had temple prostitutes, and they brought children to sacrifice to these 2 gods. This is how ugly. This is the cancer that we say that God had them cut out. They were sacrificing their children, prostituting themselves. It was not pretty. And that's why God judged them. And God judged them with the nation of Israel. And rather than the nation of Israel fixing this and get rid of the cancer, they fell into it, right? And the nation of Israel started doing this stuff and worshiping Baal and Ashtar. So that's why God allowed their enemy to take them over. And that's why they needed the judge. So the first judge, like I said, he goes ahead and he's victorious over them. He drives them out. But he doesn't wipe them all out still, right? but he ruled for 40 years of peace in that region. That region ended because he died. The second apostasy fell, and we get Ehud. Ehud is the second judge. He has 19 verses, so he's also a major judge. And he's famous for when you read him. But once again, I'll read this Judges. Now we're into chapter 3. That was chapter 2. Now we're into chapter 3. And he goes, again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. Like I said, it's a theme, right? That's that pattern that they did evil in the eyes of the Lord. In this time, the Moab people, the people of Moab, were the ones that were oppressing them, and Amalek. The thing about this judge, if you read it, one of the things, he was a lefty, and they made a big deal if you're reading the verses. He's left-handed. I don't know what percent of the population's left-handed. Any lefties in? Any left-handeds in here? Yeah.
All right.
Look at that.
Maybe it's both. And a right arm.
Yeah. Interesting. So, but they made a big point, and I guess the point that they were making that he was left-handed was people guarded against the right hand because you're going to get killed, hit, punched with the right. They didn't check him, and he had a knife that he could get with his left hand. And he went to this king, and this king, the Bible actually says he was fat. Now, the Bible doesn't talk about people's body type a lot, right? But in this particular judgment, they do. They call him fat. I mean, the way they explain it, he's Jabba the Hutt fat. For any of you Star Wars fans who know, he's fat. And because what Ehud does is he goes there and he tells the judge, or tells the king, I got a secret to tell you. And he goes, what? And he gets up to him and he reaches with his left hand, he grabs a knife and he jabs it into this king's gut. He jabs it so far, the knife in his hand goes in to the belly, and when he pulls his hand out, he leaves the knife in there. And
That's grosser than the towels.
it is kind of puts another door. And then this guy, he leaves, and how he escapes, he says he's on the toilet, right? The king. And so he's dying, he's bleeding to death, and his guards stay out because they don't want to go in there and bother him. But they got longer and longer, and eventually he went in there, and he had already escaped because they waited so long, and they finally went in, and he bled out. So this is, once again, the R-rated stuff here. It's a little gross, it's a killing. I would say, in today's environment especially, you could make some movies on this, right? I mean, Hollywood has nothing on the movies you could make with these judges. And we've never, I mean, even the movie of Samson, which I love that movie, that old movie they made about Samson, but it was soft pedaled, Even Hollywood at the time back when, who made it? Did Cecil B. DeMille didn't make that one, did he? I don't know who made Samson. Anyway, but it was PG rated. Anybody could watch that with your family on the story of Samson.
Scott,
Yes.
in the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, there's a special operations unit called Ehud Dalat Dassim. They specialize, they're assassins, to put quite simply. But a lot of times we don't think that the modern day Israelis pay a lot of attention to our Old Testament, right? But there's so many similarities. It's crazy. But these guys specialize in knives.
And he was basically an assassin. That brother guy, he was an assassin.
They also got a Samson option in the event of a conflict with Iran.
Yeah, you're right. They get a defense code named Samson, because Samson, of course, kills himself with everyone else in the end. But yeah, so in Israel, that's last resort. There's Samson.
What do you specialize in? Nothing. What my wife tells me to do.
Good answer.
There's a wise man there.
So we get to the third judge, and it's the third cycle. Now, right in the beginning or halfway through this, they're always the third cycle of apostasy with the third judge. As we get further down, we'll enter some cycles with multiple judges. But right now they're mapping, but they don't always map. This is one of those judges. He's a minor judge, obviously, because he's got one verse. And here's the one verse. Chapter 3, verse 31 is all we know about him. And Ehud came, after Ehud, because we just discussed Ehud with the knife, came Shamgar, son of Anath, who struck down 600 Philistines with an ox goat. And, it's funny. We lived in Italy back in 78, 79, 80, and they were still using these on their ox. They were still plowing in 78 and 79 in Italy, their fields with ox, and they had these. They were still, you direct an ox's direction with these things. There's a little sharp point on it. Not a lot about Shamgar, but he kills 600 Philistines with one of these. So, and Philistines were warriors, right? They were warrior type. And of course, we know Philistines most from Samson, the story of Samson. So we don't know a lot about this, but what we do know is he had an impact, obviously, on there because he killed. So all we know about him is basically he freed them by killing 600 Philistines with an ox goat. Gets us to the fourth judge and the fourth cycle of apostasy. So I'm not saying this, but the cycle, the judge dies, it's the same cycle, that big chart we went through. That's what happens. They repented, they got a judge, they live in peace because the judge frees them, and then the judge dies. When the judge dies, boom, we start the next cycle. So this is the fourth cycle of apostasy. And this is Deborah. This is the only female out of the 12, 11 male judges and one female. Deborah is not only a judge, she's a prophetess. So God used her as a prophet and a judge. We don't have a lot of those. Eli and Samuel, there's some prophets and judges. But Deborah is both a prophet and a judge. She's a major judge because she's got 55 verses applied to her story. And she rules them for 40 years. Now, she, like I said, the normal judges, they're like chieftains. But because she's a prophetess and a judge, she did sit at the city gates, and people came to her with their problems, and she solved their problems. She gave them advice and solved their problems. So she did more than just raise up as a judge. She also was more like what we would think a judge is, ruling over issues and stuff. So there comes a point where they're being oppressed. They cried out, and God gives her the message to deliver them. And she calls Barak. Barak is the general of that particular family's army, and he's not a really good guy, or he's a chicken. He's not looking to go to war. But she basically tells him, God says you're going to go and you're going to win. God has given your enemies into your hands, and he basically says, well, I'm not going to go unless you go with me. And he goes, okay, I'll go with you, but because of your cowardice, because of your what you're doing, you're not going to be given the victory of the battle. So he will lead the battle, but she says a woman will be given the victory of this battle. You think it's going to be her, right? Because she's going to go with him, because he's requiring her to go for him to go. And she might even thought it was going to be herself, but it ends up not being herself. In fact, what happens is they're in the battle, and the king is fighting, and a woman up higher on the wall takes a stone and throws it down and hits him in the head, and he's dying, and he asks his armor bearer to kill him because he didn't want to go down in history as having a woman kill him. So he's dying, and he's going to die. So his armor bearer actually comes out and takes the sword and thrusts it through him. Or am I getting that story mixed up? That happens, but I think that's actually another one. I apologize. Let me reel that back in, because that's a different judge. This judge also dies. The king dies by a woman, but this time, I'm sorry, Sisera is the general, okay, of this king, and they're on the run. And Sisera's running from Barak and his army, and he reaches an oasis with a lady in a tent, and the tent is set up, and he goes, I am tired and exhausted, and the custom is to be hospitable. So he goes, can you give me something to drink? She says, sure. She invites him into the tent, and he lays down and she gets him milk instead of water, but milk, and he drinks it. And the commentaries all say stuff like the milk has whatever that produces melatonin, which causes you to sleep and go to sleep. So he drinks it. He gets tired. He goes to sleep. She takes this is R-rated as well, takes a stake, a tent stake, and a hammer, puts it on his temple, and drives the stake tent through his temple into the ground and kills him. So Deborah's prophecy comes true, where he dies at the hands of a woman. So that's on that one. And of course, once again, chapter 4 that we're in for Deborah, verse 1, it says, again, the Israelites did evil in the sight of the Lord. Every one of these, right? This is God saying, the reason I'm doing this whole cycle, is because Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. Yep, let's pick it up. Then we get to Gideon. Gideon's also one of the major judges, ruled for 40 years as well. There's 100. He probably has the most verses of any of the judges. Well, he does have the most verses for any of the judges on there. And I'm going to briefly tell you the story of Gideon so we can pick the pace up a little. Gideon's fame is he's kind of a coward. The Midianites are against his people, and God calls him when he's at a threshing floor. And that's where you go up and you harvest, and you're throwing the wheat in the air, and the wind's supposed to blow away all the stalks and stuff and leave just the wheat at the ground. That's how they do it. But they normally do it on the top of a hill where there's a nice breeze to do this. He's in a valley hiding, and God addresses him, mighty valor, how does he put it? I didn't put it here. How did I not do that? I should have put. God calls him a mighty man of valor. I thought I had that in the verse, but I don't. Mighty man of valor, and Gideon's got to be saying, "Who are you talking to?" He's in there hiding from the Midianites, doing his work, his harvesting and stuff. And this is when God calls him to go against the Midianites, and the Midianites have 40,000 people. They got a large army, and Gideon's got about 35,000 people in his family, in his tribe. And God says, that's too many people for me to get the credit. That's too many people to go. So he goes through this whole elimination process before he even does that, Gideon didn't know if he wanted to go. So he makes God, he fleeces God. He says, I'll tell you what, if this message is truly from God, tell me to do it. Have the dew on the ground, but no dew on the mat. And then, of course, that happens. And then he does, okay, just to confirm that, tomorrow have dew on the mat, but not on the ground. And God does that. And so Gideon finally realizes, yes, this is God calling me to do it, so I'll do it. Not a good advice to be fleecing God when he's calling you to do something, but
Prove it.
But he goes ahead and does it. And like I said, he's got these 35,000 people, and God says it's too many. So he does the process of elimination. God ends up whittling this down to 300 people. And he does it by, anybody who drinks down like a dog, laps it, don't take. The only people he allows them to take out of the whittling this down are the people that went down for water and scooped the water with their hand and were aware of their surroundings and what was going on. Because these were 300 mighty men of God. And so Gideon takes 300 men into battle, and God gives against 40,000 men, and they're victorious with 300 men. That he does that so only God could get the credit for that. And God does that a lot, right? Sometimes God doesn't want us to be he doesn't want to accomplish something we want to accomplish in a way we could take credit for it. And sometimes we say, God, why'd you wait so long? Or why'd you do it this way? Normally, God does things so that only he can get the credit for it. And it's not always painless on us. Sometimes it's painful for us to go to that way. But he wants, if we could win easily and still give credit to God, maybe we would win easily. But normally if we win, we assume it was because of our wisdom or our business intuitivity or whatever, that's why I'm successful in life and stuff. So 6th cycle, so this is an interesting thing. The 6th cycle starts, we just had Gideon and some more story. Obviously there's 100 verses, so there's other stuff there. One of the other stories about Gideon was they wanted him to be king. He didn't want to be king, but he lived like a king. So he lived like a king because of his success, but he didn't want to be their king. Well, when he dies, his son, Abimelech, ends up becoming king. but he's not a judge. He's not called by God. He's not a judge, and it's a disaster. And this is the story I told you with the stone. And there's a picture of the stone down here, and Abimelech down there. So Abimelech was a self-appointed king for only 3 years, right? This is the story I was getting to, where the woman, he was fighting. The woman was up on the top, and she threw down a stone, hit him in the head, and killed him. He didn't want to die by the hands of a woman, so he actually asked his armor bearer to thrust him through with a sword. So it's kind of like a break from our normal pattern of judge, judge, judge. We have this little interlude here with a self-appointed king coming in there before God calls up the next judge. So that gets us to the next judge. Notice there's no apostasy cycle here, because he's the judge. This is the overlap of the Abimelech, self-appointed king. Tola ends up getting called. He only has 2 verses. And basically the verses are right here. After the time of Abimelech, a man of Issachar named Tola, son of Pua, and the son of Dodo. Am I really pronouncing that right? I have no idea. Rose to save Israel. He lived in Shimar in the hill country of Ephraim. He led Israel 23 years. Then he died and was buried in Shimar. So he led for 23 years, and we have 2 verses about him. We don't know a lot, but the mere fact, once again, he led for 23 years, said God used him. So you got to use your imagination on what went on for 22 years, but probably prosperity, right? But he rules them for 22 years, then he dies. Same thing here. JR, he's 3 verses on him. He's a minor judge as well. He rules for 22 years during the 6th cycle of apostasy. And we just have these verses here. He was followed by JR of Gilead, who led Israel 22 years. This is interesting. He had 30 sons who rode 30 donkeys. They controlled 30 towns in Gilead, which to this day are called Havov, Jara. Anyway, when Jair died, he was buried in Camel. So that's all we know about him. We know he ruled for 22 years. So a lot of the minor judges, because we only have 1 or 2 or 3 verses, we know what we know. Kind of a strange story about him, right? Had to have 30 sons, 30 donkeys, rode 30 donkeys, and controlled 30 cities. You have to use your imagination for the minor prophets.
Those are the high points of his career.
Those are the high points of his career.
Yeah, the only points that have made it into the Bible.
Jephthah is the 7th cycle of apostasy. He has 60 verses for Jephthah. Jephthah was an interesting character. He has 2 interesting things about him. One, he was the son of a prostitute. So his father had a relation with a prostitute, had him. As you're reading, he has 60 verses. As you're reading this story, he was shunned by his other brothers, his half-brothers. They pushed him out. And so he's living on his own, building his family on his own, separate from his father's family, because they shunned him because he was a son of a prostitute. But now war breaks out. And I guess he was a chieftain. He was a mighty man. So his brothers come to him and say, will you come back and lead me? And he basically reminded them how they treated him, how they pushed him out. They go, yeah, we know, we're sorry. So he agrees and he comes back. So that's the good part of him. The bad part of what he does, big over right here, is he makes an oath. And he says to God, I make an oath that if you give me victory, that when I come home, whoever's the first to come out of my house, whatever comes out of my house first, I will sacrifice to you. Well, guess who comes out first when he comes back? His daughter, his only daughter. And now we get to the difficult thing of different people having different opinions. The Bible basically, I think I keep this. Yeah. The Bible basically tells, I'm going to let you guys interpret this for yourselves, because there's a lot of different agreements on what that oath meant, how he carried it out. But this is what the Bible says about it, right? And Jephthah made a vow to the Lord. if you give the Ammonites into my hands, whoever comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return in triumph from the Ammonites will be the Lord's, and I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering. And then we'll drop down to 34. When Jephthah returned to his home in Mizpah, who should come out to meet him but his daughter, dancing with the sounds of timbrels? She was she was his only child. Except for her, he had neither son nor daughter. And then 39, after 2 months, she returned to her father, and he did to her as he had vowed. And she was a virgin. And there's more to this story if you read the details, because she when her father says what he did, she goes, I understand. She agrees to it, and she goes, give me so many months, like 3 months or whatever, to go off into the wilderness with my handmaids, and because she was a virgin. And then when she comes back, he completes his vow. Some people say he completed the vow and killed her. Some people say the vow was to dedicate her to the Lord, and she was given to the Lord, never to have kids, to live a virgin life out, serving the Lord. I don't know, but you don't make... What this story tells me is, well, he was chosen by God to free Israel. He completely lost the character of God. God would have never requested that. God does not honor that, and God does not like that. And we know the story of Isaac, where Abraham was taking him up, and it was a picture of what Christ was going to do on the cross. But God provided a substitute. They're being disciplined because they had relationship with the Canaanite who sacrificed children. God did not like that. God was removing the cancer of that practice, not asking anybody to do that practice. So this was his downfall. Jephthah should never have made that oath, right? But I know to us today, when we make an oath for something, too many people are quickly to break their word. And us as believers should never break our word. We say something, we should mean it. And we remember this is the tribe of Israel. When they made with the Jebusites, they made an oath to them. Even though they were tricked, they made an oath, they honored their oath. You honor your oath, you honor your word. Our word should be our word. But to this degree, I'm going to let you guys do with what you will. But the message here is he did not know the heart of God. That was not the heart of God. That gets us to the next Ibzan, which he's got 3 verses to his name. He ruled for 7 years. We know very little about him as well. But he did have 30 sons. He had 30 sons and 30 daughters. So
You have 30 donkeys?
he did have 30 daughters. I know he's fallen short, right? But he had 30 sons and daughters. He only had 30 sons.
That's true. That's true. He made up for
Would you like 30 sons and daughters, or 30 sons and
donkey.
30 donkeys? I take the 30 sons.
So he got the daughters and got donkeys.
Yeah. Upgrading. So we don't know a lot about this judge either, but for time. But he ruled for 7 years, and then he died. And then we have Elon, who has 2 verses, and he rules them for 10 years. He's another minor prophet. Don't know a lot about him. After him, Elon, son of Zebulun, led Israel 10 years. That's basically what we know about him. Then we get to Abaddon. He's a minor judge as well. He's got 3 verses. So these go pretty quick, right? These we don't know a lot about him, but he ruled for 8 years. He had 40 sons and 30 daughters who rode 70 donkeys.
That's 70.
Upgrade, guys. A little bit of upgrade. This is telling about their importance, right? I mean, if you have that big of a family with that big, you are prominent, because not everybody had, that's why the Bible explicitly points this type of stuff out. But it's a symbol of wealth. The size of the family suggests he was wealthy. So. But basically, that's all we know about him, and he ruled for 8 years. That gets us to probably the most well-known judge and the final judge, the 12th judge, and the last cycle of apostasy. And this gets us to Samson. And we know about Samson because I guess if any Bible study does any of the judges, they're going to do Samson, right? It's funny when they had their fall festival last month. People come as Samson. You know, it's one of the characters that people might dress up as for fall feast, for fall festival. Yeah. So we know the story of Samson. He was not, well, he's probably the most popular judge. He's by no means the best. In fact, out of the 12, he's probably the worst. His character is the worst. God chose him. God went to the parents, or an angel went to the parents and said that your son has been chosen and he's going to be a Nazarite. Remember when we were back in Deuteronomy, we talked about the vow of Nazarene. A Nazarite is someone that normally not chosen for life. You make a Nazarite vow for a particular time, for a particular event that you're going to do, and it has some things you abstain from. You don't drink anything from the fruit of the vine, no liquor, no wine. You don't touch dead people. You don't cut your hair. There's these things. Well, Samson was dedicated as a Nazarite from birth to life, his whole life. That's very unusual. But he doesn't live that way. The angel gave that vow to his parents to make it, and they kept it while they were under his control. But very quickly, he became an unruly son, right? And he had a liking for the Canaanite women, and he told his parents, go get me a Canaanite wife. Really, that was disrespectful to his parents. One, because he should have married inside the nation of Israel. But he wanted a Canaanite wife, and he told his parents to go get him one. They got him one. There was two of them. He was a womanizer. If you read the detail, he was just a womanizer. He was a
Very handsome young man too, ripped and everything.
Ripped. Yeah.
womanizer, a drunk. So he broke all the vows that you can break of being a Nazarite. But he's famous for things too, right? He's famous for killing the lion with his bare hands. He takes the lion and he breaks the jaws of the lion, and then he comes back on that lion later on, and bees had made honey in there, and he eats the honey of the from the bees in there, and that gives him the idea of the riddle. Then there's that story of he's going to marry the Canaanite woman, and he has fun with this all the time. It's one, not a godly thing either, but this Canaanite men, he tells them a riddle. If you can tell me the answer to this riddle, I'll give you 40 whatever it was pieces of clothing and stuff like that. If you can't, you got to give it to me. And his wife, they bugged her for the answer. He finally gives her the answer, and she gives it to them, and then they answer the riddle on his wedding night that night, and he realizes she did that. And so out of his anger, he kills the Philistines to get the clothing that he has to pay his debt in. So he pays his debt, but he does it by killing a bunch of Philistines, which he should have been, warring over them as anyway, right? But they didn't. And then that was his first wife. Then he gets Delilah, right? Now he says he gets his eyes on Delilah. Everybody knows the story of Samson and Delilah, right? And this pattern of him, he's becoming a thorn in the side of the Philistines. He does this thing with the fox where he ties their tails together and he burns a bunch. There's a number of interesting stories, but due to lack of time, we're probably not going to be able to get to them. And most of you guys know these stories of Samson anyway. But basically, he marries Delilah, and then the Philistines pay her and say, we want you to tell us how he gets his strength. And he gives her numerous false reasons. And each time, if you tie me with unused ropes that have never been used before, then I'll be like any other man, and I won't have a strength. And then when the Philistines come, he just breaks them. And then she's all, I do not understand Samson at all, because she's all whiny saying, you lied to me. Well, you kind of betrayed me, And he does this 3 times or something like that. And each time she betrays him to the Philistines, and each time he lies, finally she's relentless and saying, you must not love me, blah, blah. So he tells him, it's my Nazarene vow, And really, he's already broken those vows, so it really wasn't even that. It was his Nazarene vow to God. And by him saying it's my hair, when if I cut my hair, I've broken the Nazarene vow, which I'm thinking to myself, okay, you've already broken it in other ways, but okay, so he breaks this one, but he does. He tells Delilah it's his hair, so she cuts his hair off and calls the Philistines in, and sure enough, he's as strong, because as you know, he's super, super strong, that God gives him strength, supernatural strength. He loses that, and the Philistines capture him. They poke his eyes out, and they put him in. Yes.
I just want to add to, he's always depicted as this like real buff guy.
Right.
But I've always kind of wondered if he was a little tiny Jewish man and looked unassuming. And
Right.
the hour of God would come on in and he'd just rip people apart.
Yeah. And we're not told, right? Because we don't get a physical description of him, but you're exactly right. His strength did not come because he was working out. His strength did not come necessarily because he was Samson-like, 9 foot tall and all that. His strength came
Because
from
that
the
would
Lord.
also scare, like, people coming at him would be afraid. But if he looks unassuming, like a regular guy,
Right.
it's like, let's get this guy. Dude, he's just, destroyed.
No, very good point. And it's probably true. I doubt, he probably was not 6'6" and ripped. He probably wasn't that way. He's probably more like he was just chosen by God, and he had this supernatural strength because the strength came from God, not himself. But anyway, we're not. So the story of Samson ends where he's in captivity with the Philistines, and he goes to their temple, and they're having this feast, and they use him in sport over and over, making fun of him, and he prays to God to return his power. God returns his power to him, and he tells the boy who's leading him around, "Take me to the post to hold up the city." And sure enough, the boy took him up there, and that's where he pushes them apart, collapses the whole temple, and everybody in the temple, including himself, die in that scene. And the Bible says he killed more Philistines in his death than he did his whole life. So that's the main story. And that's where we get where the Israelites actually have this plan called Samson, and it's kind of a suicide plan if they get overwhelmed. So this is the final, the eighth apostasy and the final judge in there. So now we get to that third bucket I talked about, and we have a story. Because of time, I'm going to just really tell this real quick. The Benjamites went to a Levite, and the Levite was bad, but they went to the Levite and they raped his concubine, okay, and killed her. And then he went to the rest of the tribes and complained. The Levites complained, and so they went to the Benjamites, and they wanted the people who did this. The Benjamites protected the people. So all the other 11 tribes went against the Benjamites, and they killed all but 600 of them. And they made an oath not to give them any of their women. So in the heat of the battle and stuff. So now after the battle's over, they're realizing, you know what? We're going to lose a whole tribe. The Benjamites have no way to reproduce, and when these people die, the Benjamite tribe will be gone. So what happens is they come up with this, like all Jewish lawyers, come up with a loophole in the law. And because they made an oath, so they can't. So they called all the people that made the oath together, and they did a census. And there was one group of people that were missing from it. So they went to that. They told the Benjamite people to go to that group that was not there, that did not make the oath, and kidnap their women. When their women come out to the water, kidnap them, and they took them. And when they went to the rest of the tribe saying, hey, they took our women, they said, yes, but, and they explained the situation. They're going to take them as your wives because you didn't make an oath, and we'll lose the tribe of Benjamin. So it's kind of this whole story in there. And so the Benjamites repopulate, but they're a small tribe, but they repopulate their tribe because of the women that they kidnapped, these 600 men, and they grow from 600 men and captured other tribal or Jewish women to rebuild the tribe of Benjamin. It's an interesting story. So that's in the last one in chapters there. So anyway, so we have 21. In those days, there was no king. We end it, remember, with this. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. So that's how it's going to be. The Bible says that that's how it's going to be in the end days. That it'll be just like the day of Judges, where each man will do what's right in his own eyes. The closer we get to that, where everybody just does what's right in their own eyes, And of course, that'll really be the case when the church is raptured and the restrainer is gone. Everybody's going to do what's right in their own eyes.